Welcome to this short video on how to use the Eatwell guide safely with children and families. So the Eatwell guide can be a very helpful tool for teaching about nutrition, provided it's used to encourage variety and moderation, and it doesn't drift into teaching fear and guilt, and also that the main reasons that people have for choosing food other than its nutritional value are respected. So just take a look at the Eatwell guide in a bit more detail. You can see there's quite a lot of information to take on board. We have the main circle with the 5 different food groups, the 2 largest ones being fruits and vegetables, starchy carbohydrates, smaller ones at the bottom, the non-dairy protein-based foods like meat, fish, eggs, nuts and pulses, calcium-rich dairy foods, and that tiny little purple sliver there is oils and spreads. And now sitting outside of the main circle are some of the foods like crisps, biscuits, chocolate, ice cream, etc. that used to be part of the purple group on the old Eatwell plate, if you remember that. And some additional messages around traffic light labelling of food labels in the top left, hydration on the top right, and calorie requirements for adults on the bottom right. So one of the challenges here is to try and not overwhelm people with negative messaging. And if we just take a look at some of the more negative messages within this model, then we have a traffic light warning, we have some restrictive messages, and we have encouragement to choose starchy foods with less added fat, sugar and salt. Same for calcium-rich dairy foods. And then the fruit and vegetable message is not so much restrictive as prescriptive with our 5-a-day message. And finally, the message around calorie counting. So the idea here is to teach anything in moderation, but the effect that it could have if you overwhelm somebody with negative messaging is to teach fear and to make people feel fearful and afraid of the food they're choosing. And that's not great for developing a healthy and relaxed relationship with food. So here's a nice stripped back and uncluttered version of the Eatwell guide on the principle of less is more. Here's our starchy foods, our fruit and vegetables, protein-based foods, and our calcium-rich dairy foods. I've left off the purple group of oils and spreads. People can just use their common sense, add butter or spread to bread, oil for cooking as they wish. But we can symbolize each of these in terms of why they're important. Starchy foods for energy, fruits and vegetables for a healthy heart, protein to help us grow, and calcium-rich dairy foods for strong bones and teeth. The language you're using to describe these foods is everyday foods. So by including these foods every day or most days, we can be far more confident that we're getting everything that the brain and body needs to nourish it. So what words can we use to describe these foods, the foods that now sit outside the Eatwell guide? Typically, we might use words like unhealthy or junk or treats, tasty, some people might feel, or bad. Some of this language is quite moralistic and quite problematic. Doesn't mean I'm bad for eating those foods or wanting those foods, or I'm necessarily unhealthy because I include some of them. Do I want them more because they've been described as treats? Safer terminology that's clear to understand but is less moralistic might be, in contrast to everyday foods, that these foods are sometimes foods. They don't give us anything that we absolutely fundamentally need from a nutritional point of view, but we might still want to choose some of them and include them some of the time. So a little addition we can use to the Eatwell guide is to look at a comparison with growing vegetables, in this instance a leek, and thinking about what it needs to nourish it. It needs water, not too much, not too little. It needs the right amount of sun. It needs carbon dioxide from the air, and of course it needs nutrients from the soil. Altogether it needs about 17 different nutrients. In terms of human health, we need about 40 different nutrients. We need those to come from our diet. And this slide just brings all that together. So the leek needs air for carbon dioxide. We need air for oxygen. We both need water. We both need sun. The leek needs it for photosynthesis. We need it for vitamin D. And the leek gets its nutrients from the soil. We get our nutrients by making sure that we include foods from each of the 4 everyday food groups of the Eatwell Guide. Of course, no visual model covers everything. The Eatwell Guide doesn't cover the reasons we choose the food that we do. That's worth exploring. It also doesn't make any reference to how much we should eat or how often we should eat, although it does make reference to calories, but as we've said earlier, that's potentially problematic. It doesn't really cover food processing and the impact on health, and it doesn't cover the environmental impact of the food choices that we make either. And this slide just looks at the affordability of the Eatwell Guide for different households. So it's just making the point that the poorest households in the UK would need to spend the vast majority of their income on food alone to meet the minimum requirements of the Eatwell Guide, after you take into account housing costs. As income goes up, of course, the proportion that you need to spend on food to meet the requirements of the Eatwell Guide becomes more manageable. And advertising and marketing certainly has a big effect on our food choices. So these pupils here are using the old Eatwell plate. If you remember, the purple group had the foods that we're now calling sometimes foods. These pupils have seen foods advertised on TV or through social media, and they're then writing that down on the post-it and putting it onto the food group that it belonged to. And you can see the overrepresentation of sometimes foods in advertising and marketing rather than everyday foods. So thanks to our colleagues in NHS Highland Public Health, we also have a very good leaflet called Everyday Eating for Child Health and Wellbeing, and that's where we introduce the idea of the Highland Food Guide, which includes some guidance on how to eat and what to eat. So in terms of how to eat, something not really covered by the Eatwell Guide, focus on making everyday food available, eating meals as a family when you can, eating when you're hungry, stop when you're full, that kind of guidance. And as well as how to eat, the leaflet also gives some guidance on what to eat. And so here's a couple of websites you might want to visit for further guidance. If you're a primary school teacher, you might want to take a look at the resources on the High Five website. And if you're a health professional or a parent or a carer and you're interested in food and health, you might want to take a look at the Bumps to Bairns website. Thank you very much for watching this video.